Good morning, Dr. Shad.
Good morning.
Nice to see you today. Thank you so much for joining me on Michelle's Conversations That Matter.
It is my pleasure to be with you.
Awesome. I am so excited that I had the pleasure of being introduced to you, and then I've been doing some snooping around about the work that you do, and I thought this is such an important topic when it comes to overall well-being and mental health. So I had to have you on, and I'm grateful that you're here. But just a little bit before we dive into this topic, this really key topic, the importance of positive self-talk, I just want to introduce my series for people who don't know. I have Michelle's Conversations That Matter as a platform to really talk openly about different mental health challenges and really elevate the conversation around well-being and empower and educate people. What I do professionally is I work with organizations to recenter their people and cultivate cultures of compassion for people with invisible disability. So I'm thrilled to talk to you today about a topic that is personal for me. I know that self-talk definitely has influenced me, and I'm present to the power of it. But I'm thrilled to learn from you. Before we dive in, could you introduce yourself, Dr. Shad? Who are you? Where do you live? And what do you do for a living?
Well, I've been writing, studying in the field of self-talk, positive self-talk, and motivation. And I've been writing in that field for just over 35 years. And I've written something over 25 books in that area. And right now I am still writing, and I'm in northern Florida talking to you today.
Awesome. That's fantastic. So this whole topic of the importance of self-talk, what is your backstory? How did you get connected to such a fascinating topic? We talked a little bit before we went on the air, but I'd love for people to understand why this is important to you and why you do this work.
Well, my first career path was as a linguist. I was a Spanish-English interpreter in Cuba for the United States government during what was called the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so I had studied foreign languages, and later I wanted to pursue my interest in motivational psychology and human behavior. And I began to recognize that people who were doing really well in life were actually thinking differently than people who were struggling. Or they would try to do better and then fail, try to do better and not do as well as they wanted. And because of my background in language, I understood a lot about how we learn language and the language we think in determines a lot of what we think and how we think. And I started to put two and two together. What if people who are struggling, whether it's stress or weight loss or finances or relationships, whatever it is, I thought, what if people who are having a difficult time with this, what if they're actually programmed from birth to think in the wrong language? I don't mean in English or another language, but it would be like the language of success or the language of neutral or the language of failure. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to study what we now call self-talk and then positive self-talk to see if we could actually change that language in the brain. And it turned out that my original assumption or hypothesis was correct. We can literally rewire the brain with a different vocabulary of success.
That's fascinating. That is absolutely fascinating. And when I asked you your first experience with this work, you mentioned it was around weight loss.
Yes, I wanted to try this idea out for myself because I thought, what if we can rewire the brain to think differently and cause us to take different actions and so on? I wonder if it could work on something really difficult like weight loss, because at that time, this was obviously a number of years ago, but I had a significant problem with weight. I got really good at dieting, and so I would take the weight off, but then it would always come back, and of course it would bring its friends, and so I would be on this yo-yo diet, and it was year after year, and I decided, I wonder if positive self-talk could fix that. And so I began to listen to I wrote and recorded self-talk programs for that problem. And the programs that I listened to, the self-talk that I listened to, wasn't so much about food. It was about me, how I saw myself, my self-esteem, how I took action, how I did the right thing, and so on. And what happened was, in 10 and a half weeks, I lost 58 pounds, shaving in the morning, listening to self-talk in the background. And that impressed me. And then what really impressed me was that my wife at the time, who was putting her makeup on in the other mirror each morning while I was listening to self-talk, my wife at that time lost 25 pounds eavesdropping on my cassette tapes that I was listening to. And then I realized, oh, this doesn't make any difference whether we believe it or not, or think about it or not.
Yeah.
And that brought me back to the rediscovery of how we learn our first language. And we learn that first language by having it spoken in the background of our lives. We learned our first language as perfectly as the people around us were speaking it. And we did that without ever going to a single day of school or classes or anything. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the brain was designed to wire that new language in. Mm-hmm. Turned out that the key was repetition. Mm-hmm. So now, since that time, I've been writing and producing self-talk programs for many, many years for every possible kind of need, relationships and finances and stress right now, especially, and things like that. And what I had discovered, and what turned out to be true neurologically, is that the key to success, the key to changing your self-talk, is actually repetition. Mm. The key to success is repetition, repetition, repetition. And so, based on more recent findings in neuroscience and our ability to look into the brain while we're thinking and watch what it's doing, it's become clear now that original hypothesis that you could change your self-talk by listening to repeated new self-talk, that turned out to be true in terms of neuroscience in the brain. There's an interesting thing on that I think your viewers and listeners will find fascinating. I know I certainly have, and that's people who think in the negative. That is most of the time, or negative thinkers. Mm-hmm. People who do a lot of negative thinking actually grow more neural networks into the right prefrontal cortex of their brain. So that would be right behind there. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, that's a part of the brain that causes us to run or hide or stop or fail, not take action. So you might say that's the failure or defeat center of the brain. Mm-hmm. On the other side, people who think in the positive, like positive thinking. I don't mean Pollyanna perfect thinking, but people who are optimists and who tend to think in the positive most often. Right. They actually grow more neural networks in the left prefrontal cortex of their brain. And that happens to be a part of the brain that causes us to seek and find solutions and to take action and to get things done. So you could say that that's where success lives, in the brain. So at one time, people, when positive thinking first got popular some decades ago, many people thought, well, there couldn't be anything to that. Positive thinking is just a myth because words don't mean anything and words don't go anywhere. When in fact, we've now learned we can watch this happen in the brain. Every thought we think is actually recorded in the brain. And then every thought you think or everything you say repeatedly is not only recorded, but it's wired into the brain. So you're literally changing the structure, the wiring of your brain by the messages that you think and say throughout the day. Wow. Unconsciously, we're actually, all of us are wiring our brain all of the time.
Wow. It's fascinating. So I think I'm relatively a positive thinker, right? If you were to determine who's positive more of the time or negative, but I still have this like, you know, this negative aspect. I call it the itty bitty shitty committee that has commentary all the time. How do we shrink that? Is it through the repetition of, like, how do we shrink that? Is it, do you believe it is the repetition of your programs that helps sort of embed more of a natural positive disposition?
It's actually two things. One is, from the moment we're born, we get programmed. And 90, or some say 95% of those hundreds of thousands of programs that we got from other people along the way, and then from our own self-talk, 90 to 95% of those programs are completely hidden from us. We don't even know what they are. So that's what we call our subconscious mind. We also call it our autopilot, because the part of the brain that stores all of the messages we got growing up, and then listening to others, and then from our own self-talk also. The messages that we got were recorded in the brain, and the part of the brain that stores all those messages, whether they were bad or good or right or wrong, doesn't make any difference to the brain. It just acts on the programs we have that are the strongest. It's been estimated that during the first 18 years of your life, if you grew up in a reasonably positive home, you were told no, or what you could not do, what wouldn't work for you, more than 148,000 times. I actually think that's a low number, because a lot of the messages we got weren't aimed at us directly, but we still got them as messages. And what that results in is another estimate, and that is about 77% of the programs that we got are, and the programs we have right now, are negative or counterproductive, or work against us. So that's a big negative to start with. That's where a lot of our negative programming came from. So that's one issue. And I'll make this really simple. The other side is, we have something in the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is it's our alarm center. It's designed to alert us to anything that could possibly go wrong or hurt us. And apparently it was given to the amygdala, got created or became stronger in the brain when eons of time ago we lived in areas in the jungle, perhaps, and we were looking out for the saber-toothed tiger because it could kill us. And so the amygdala was the alert system that would say there's something wrong here, or I sense danger, and danger, Will Robinson. So that's the amygdala. And the amygdala is still as strong as ever. The problem is we don't live back in those jungles of the past. Most of us live in a very different situation where things aren't really as frightening today as they were back then, but the amygdala doesn't know that. So it keeps alerting us to things as though they could really harm us, when in fact they wouldn't. Subtle thoughts drift through our mind about, I wonder if I paid that bill, or whatever that thought might be. And the amygdala goes on high alert and says, oh no, this is a problem. Or you're going in for a job interview, and your amygdala might say, this is bad. You messed up in the past. You'll probably mess up this time, and so on. So those two factors come together: the amygdala, which is designed to alert us to danger, and our old negative programming, most of which is unconscious and is forcing us or creating our thoughts. That, as I said, our autopilot. What we've learned, and what's very positive and exciting, is that positive self-talk actually quiets the amygdala. It retrains, it begins to retrain the amygdala to be more calm, more quiet, to not alert us to everything that's going on, even if it's not really bad. And positive self-talk also, through repetition, because you listen maybe 15 minutes a day and you're listening to repeated self-talk, that's literally rewiring your brain. And the way that works in the brain is, when you learn positive self-talk, when you start practicing self-talk, you start using the new vocabulary, the new language. And when you're using that, the brain thinks, oh, I don't need that old stuff anymore. I better get rid of that, because the brain can only contain so much information. And so it has only so many neurons, and it's a finite or a limited number. So it wants to get rid of anything that it's no longer using. In the field of neuroscience, we call that pruning, just like pruning a rose bush so that the good roses can grow. So when you begin practicing and using positive self-talk, the brain finds that it no longer needs all that old negative stuff that's been going on in our mind. So it begins to prune that out. So as you can see, what happens, not only are we calming our alarm system, we're still aware of danger and problems, but not only are we calming the amygdala, we're actually learning through repetition to think in a new language, a language of optimism and taking action and reaching goals and working for it and so on. That becomes the norm. And that's a major step in changing how we react to the world around us.
That's amazing. I can only imagine how your work and these programs have served people. Do you have any stories that you can share around how your work help people?
Well, I get, of course, a lot of email from people who are changing their lives, from even kids who are learning. There's actually self-talk that I wrote for little kids. And but even kids and teenagers find that they deal with life differently in school. For instance, the right kind of self-talk changes how you look at problems in school or anywhere else. So there are many stories, good ones, of people who, everyday people, good people, whose lives take on a different direction or track. They deal with life differently because they're beginning to think differently in a very natural way by listening to the right kind of language, the right kind of self-talk. But there are also those stories that, to me, are unforgettable. One of them that comes immediately to mind is I used to have a television program called 60 Minutes to Success, and that aired all over television and all over the world. And I got a letter from a young man who wrote to tell me that one night he was sitting alone at home, ready to take his own life. He had, things had not gone well for him. His wife and family had left him. He lost his job. He was in a downward spiral, and he thought there was nothing that could possibly be done. And he wrote to me to say that he was sitting on his sofa late one night, and he was holding a pistol in his hand, and he decided to get up and go get the bullets. And in the background, he wrote, in the background, on the television was still on, and he heard this guy talking about this thing called self-talk and how you could literally reprogram failure and turn it into success. You could change your life. He heard that in the background and sat back down to see what this guy was saying. It happened to be a program that I was on talking about this, just as we're talking now. And he made the decision to not get the bullets and put them in the gun and take action on that. He decided he would wait, and maybe this program would come on again and he could learn more. So that was an early small turning point. And when he wrote to me, this was, I think, about 6 months later, he had started using self-talk, and he had gotten his wife and family back. He'd gotten his job back. He'd gotten his life back. And so he wrote to thank me for helping him do that. Actually, what happened was he did it. He had gotten bad programs to begin with. and he took the action to change those programs. So stories like that are always, they're impactful to me. But I think the real story is this is something anyone can do. And it's not just for people who are in a very bad way. It's in a dark way. It's for anyone. I often think of, we look at one person who's really successful. We look at another person who's not successful. I don't mean successful financially only. I mean successful in life.
Happiness.
And we kind of wonder sometimes, how did that happen? What's the difference?
Yeah.
One of my favorite places in the world is the infant nursery in the hospital. I've had a chance to visit that a number of times and to go there. And when we visit the infant nursery, we stand on one side of a viewing window, and then we look through, and there on the other side of the window, in those little bassinets, are these little infants, these brand new miracles, just born only hours earlier. And if we stand and watch them, and if they're awake, if their eyes are open, you can actually see them as like they're searching to live out that unlimited potential they were born with, because it's a fact. Nobody's born to fail. We're all born to do the very best we possibly can. That's how we're designed. We're not designed to fail. We're designed to do well. And so we can actually see that in the eyes of these little infants. And then one of these little infants gets his or her first programs, and even before they leave the hospital, if they're in the mother is holding the little infant, that's the first message they get. They look into their mother's eyes and so on. So that's one of the first messages. That's loving and tender. But there's probably a television set on up in the corner of the room, and its audio is on, and the messages start to come in. And of course, then the infant goes home and then begins to grow up, and then that little boy or girl, their family, and then later on in school, their friends, and then teachers, and then television, and then today, social media. As they've now grown up, they've been literally getting messages from birth on. And so a wonderful way to look at that is this is something that anybody can do right now. Imagine a person that you think of right now who you might say is one of the most successful people you know. And again, not just financially, but in life. Their life is working and spiraling upwards.
Yeah.
And so get a picture of that person. They can either be living or not living now, but someone you know or know of. And decide who that is, and then get a picture of that person in your mind. And then we'll ask for our experiment. We'll ask that person to come into the room with you right now and just stand off to the side of you. And while that super wonderful, living life well person is standing there, think of the opposite. Think of someone who is failing. When I think of that, I still think of this kid who was about 17 years old. His parents haven't seen him since he was about 17. I think if they found him, they'd find him in an alley someplace, and he probably wouldn't even recognize his parents because of the drugs in his system. But that's who I think of when I think of someone who's failing. But it could be anyone. So get a picture of someone you know or know of who is failing. Life isn't working. And then ask that person to come into the room with you, and we'll have that person stand over on the other side. Now, you have on one side, you have somebody who life is working, and they're dealing with it really well, and their life is spiraling up, so they're growing. And then over here, you have someone who is failing, even if they're working, struggling, something's just not working, and we can see it. And then you look at those two people and you ask yourself this important question: what's the real difference between those two individuals? And the answer is, the real difference between those two people is their programs. They got wired differently. They got different messages. And what's profound about that to me is that those two people that we're looking at now, one successful and the other failing, so different in life now. Those actually could have been the two little infants that we looked at in the infant nursery in the hospital just a few minutes ago, and they were both wide awake and their eyes were searching to live out that incredible potential they were born with. And they had each had that potential, and now here they are, very different. That says that our language, our mental self-talk, our programs are incredibly important to our mental health, to our physical health and well-being, to health in our relationships, in fact, in every part of our lives.
Amazing. It's so amazing, and it's so powerful. That was a perfect example to get us to recognize. And there could be arguments, so this person was raised in this situation, they were given this, whatever. But at the end of the day, you run your show as an adult. You're the one that's in control. You don't, you can blame all you want, but you're the one in the cockpit of your life. So I love that. Tell us a little bit more about your programs and what they offer. You mentioned one for weight loss. You mentioned one for stress. And you said something like 15 minutes. Can you tell us how they work?
Yes. When you listen to the app, the selftalkplus.com, when you listen to that, you just scroll through many different programs. Let's say you're listening on your phone. So you scroll through those, and there are programs that literally cover every basic area of our lives. So that could be being organized and in control. It could be dealing with other people. You mentioned stress, or we mentioned stress earlier. Yeah, that's stress has positive self-talk for dealing with stress has become one of the most popular programs on that app, and it got more popular during the pandemic. And that's easy to see why. People are uncertain about a lot of things, so that's a good one to listen to. But there are other programs that have to do with health and fitness. For instance, there are programs on career, getting better, doing well. And as I mentioned, programs for kids, which I especially like because I wish they taught this in school. I wish they taught this in preschool maybe, but yeah. It's wonderful to watch kids who have been listening to positive self-talk that's written for them. It's wonderful for kids. I've received emails and letters from parents who will say, I knew that it was working with my son. He's only 4.5, but the other morning I said it's going to be another bad day, and my son corrected me. So,
That's great. I love it. So the investment is 15 minutes a day for how long?
Yeah, approximately 15 minutes a day. Some people listen longer than that. Well, I still listen, and I've been listening for a long time, obviously. But I think that the most helpful thing to know about how long does it take would be this. When you listen to self-talk and you hear the right self-talk vocabulary and messages repeated again and again over a period of days, the brain first records those, but it doesn't wire them in permanently, immediately. It wants to know if you're serious about this. So the more it's repeated, the more it tells the brain, this is important. I want you to wire this in. And we've discovered that it takes about 3 to 4 weeks in most cases for the brain to begin to rewire itself. So if you're going to listen to self-talk, you certainly want to set a very small goal, and that is to listen at least that long. But most people will listen for many months, because when you might work on one thing and get that fixed, but there are also other things that you want to take care of as well. So someone might start with listening for self-talk for weight loss, and then find that They're starting to think differently in other areas. So how about getting organized and getting to work on time, or how about relationships and so on?
Yeah, that's amazing. Great. This is so exciting. And we have some people that were watching. We have my friend Mike. He already signed up for your program. He's watching. Wendell is here too. He's appreciative for the topic. It's really great that folks are plugging in with us today. Wow. Well, we're almost at the end of our time together. You've shared a wealth of knowledge. Your website for the self-talk programs is at the bottom of the screen, www.selftalkplus.com. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience about this important topic, about your work, anything else that you want to share with us?
Yes. If I were talking to each of your viewers individually and maybe coaching or supporting them or helping them, one message I would want to get across to each of you watching right now is you were designed for life to work. You were designed to succeed at life. You were born that way, and you were born with unlimited promise and potential. And interestingly, that never goes away. We think it does, but it's actually just been covered over with all of those other programs that told us what we could not do instead of what we can accomplish or what we can do. So your promise and your potential is still there. It's still intact. It's part of you. And give it a little time, but give the real you. And I don't want to, there's nothing wrong with motivational speakers, but I don't want to speak here like a motivational speaker or something. We now know this based on good science. We now know this based on a lot of history. What you do next will count. And if there were two of you and one of you decided to change your programs and get back to who you really are to begin with, to find your actual promise and potential and live it out and have a happier, better, stress-free or lower stress life. If one of you decided to do that for the next year, let's say, and the other you decided not to do nothing with this, and I'm not going to change my self-talk, I'll just go on being the way I was. In 1 year from today, which one of you would you vote for? I know who I would vote for. I would vote for the one who decides to take a listen, see what happens, watch it. It's a very exciting time. Right now is a perfect time to do this.
I love it. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here, for the work that you're doing, and for sharing everything that you did with us today. I think it's super important. I personally am going to go and sign up and try this for the 30 days that you mentioned, and I'll let you know how it goes.
You're going to have an incredible day.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shad. It's so wonderful that you joined me today, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.